Before we dive into today's story, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and send it to a friend who needs to hear it. Now let's begin. Her name was Clara Jennings, 38 years old, and for most of her life, she had been more of a mother than a sister to Sienna. 8 years younger, Sienna had grown up clinging to Clara's hand like a shadow. When their mother was too busy working late shifts or too tired to care, Clara had stepped in, bandaging scraped knees, chasing away nightmares, and cheering at every school recital as though she were both parent and sibling. People used to joke that Clara was born responsible, but it wasn't a joke to her, it was survival. She worked part-time at 17 just to buy Sienna's school uniforms, cooked dinner while finishing homework, and learned how to braid hair because their mother never had the patience. Over the years, that bond had felt unbreakable, until the day love turned into expectation, and expectation into betrayal. When their mother passed away after a cruel battle with cancer, Clara was left to sort through not just the funeral arrangements, but the silence that followed. The small, 3-bedroom home their mother left behind, warm, scented faintly of lavender, was Clara's only comfort. It was written in the will, simple and clear, the house belongs to Clara. But grief has a way of inviting opportunists, and even blood can turn cold when money whispers. Sienna came knocking 2 weeks after the funeral, dressed impeccably as always, her engagement ring flashing like a promise of a perfect life. Her fiancé, Damon Cross, trailed beside her, sharp suit, slick grin, and a kind of charm that felt more like calculation. They met Clara at a cafe near downtown, the kind that sold overpriced coffee and comforted the rich. "Clara," Sienna began, smiling that sugary smile she used when she wanted something. "Damon and I found our dream wedding venue. It's everything I've ever imagined, by the lake, crystal chandeliers, live orchestra, the works." Clara nodded politely, waiting for the hook she knew was coming. "It'll cost about $50,000, Sienna continued casually, as though discussing groceries. Damon leaned in, voice smooth as glass. "We thought it'd be fair if you sold Mom's house and split the money. You know, family should help family." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "The house was left to me," she said softly, "but I'll give you $10,000 as a wedding gift. That's all I can manage." Damon's smile faltered. "$10,000, he scoffed. "That won't even cover the flowers." Sienna's eyes hardened. "I can't believe you're being selfish about this," she muttered. Clara looked at her sister and saw not the little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, but a woman who had learned to take, never give. That night, Clara sat in the quiet of their mother's living room, the ticking clock echoing like a heartbeat. Every corner of the house carried memories. Pencil marks on the kitchen doorway where their heights had been recorded, coffee stains on the dining table from Sunday mornings, and the half-finished crossword puzzle their mother had left beside her reading glasses. The house wasn't just property, it was memory made solid. Clara traced her fingers over the faded handwriting on the wall and whispered, "She wanted me to have peace." But peace was something her sister wouldn't let her keep. A week later, Sienna called again, her voice syrupy sweet. "Clara, I feel awful about what happened. Let's just forget the argument. It's your birthday soon, and I want to treat you to dinner. Just family. You deserve something nice." Clara hesitated. Her husband, Evan, frowned when she told him. "That doesn't sound like Sienna," he said. "She's never generous without a reason." Clara laughed nervously, trying to believe otherwise. Maybe she's trying to make things right. But in the pit of her stomach, a quiet dread had begun to form, a whisper that something wasn't right. The restaurant was expensive, dim lighting, white tablecloths, the kind where the waiters moved like ghosts. Clara and Evan arrived to find Sienna radiant in a red dress, Damon at her side. But what caught Clara's attention were the 3 men in suits seated nearby. No menus, no food, just briefcases. Friends of yours? Clara asked lightly. Oh, just acquaintances from Damon's office, Sienna said, her tone too breezy to be true. The evening started with polite chatter, surface-level smiles, empty laughter. Then, between the main course and dessert, Damon reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. We had some paperwork drawn up, he said casually, sliding it toward Clara. It's just a trust, so the house can be co-managed. It's better for everyone. Clara opened it and felt her blood run cold. It wasn't a trust. It was a transfer, one that would give Sienna and Damon full control of everything their mother had left. This isn't dinner, Clara whispered, trembling. This is a setup. Sienna's mask cracked. Don't be dramatic, she said sharply. You always make things so difficult. Evan leaned forward, calm but firm. You should know, he said, reaching into his jacket. We record things when something feels off. He placed a small recorder on the table, the red light blinking. This, he said, is called protection. The air changed instantly. The lawyers looked away, packing their cases. Damon's jaw flexed. Sienna's face drained of color. You can't record us, she hissed. Evan smiled coldly. Actually, we can. They left the restaurant without another word. Sienna didn't call, didn't text. But 2 weeks later, fate handed Clara the chance for truth. She and Evan were driving past the community hall when she saw fairy lights through the window. Sienna's engagement party. Cars lined the street, laughter spilling out the doors. Pull over, Clara said suddenly. Clara, Evan warned, but she was already unbuckling her seatbelt. She walked into that party like a storm, cloaked in calm. Sienna stood under a canopy of twinkling lights, surrounded by guests, her laughter ringing false and bright. Damon was at her side, champagne in hand. When the toasts began, Clara rose slowly, the room falling into hush. I wasn't planning to speak, she said, her voice steady, but there's something everyone here deserves to hear. Sienna froze, her glass trembling. Clara opened her purse and set the small recorder on the table beside the cake. She pressed play. Sienna's voice poured through the speakers, sharp, entitled, venomous. Just sign the papers, Clara. Split the money. It's only fair. Damon's voice followed, colder still. 10,000 is nothing. Don't be selfish. The room went dead silent. Faces turned. Whispers began. Sienna's perfect image shattered before her eyes. Clara stood tall. Family doesn't mean ownership, she said quietly. And love isn't a transaction. She turned and walked out as gasps and murmurs filled the air behind her, leaving her sister to drown in the truth she'd built her life upon. The whispers that followed Clara out of that glittering hall were louder than the music that had once filled it. By morning, the fallout had begun. Messages flooded her phone. Some from distant relatives apologizing, others from guests too stunned to believe what they'd heard. Damon's family, once so proud of their son's perfect match, withdrew their support almost immediately. The $50,000 dream wedding dissolved overnight. Sienna called again and again, her tone shifting from rage to tears, but Clara let every call go unanswered. She sat on her mother's porch, the faint scent of lavender drifting from the garden, and watched the sunrise as though she were watching her own freedom unfold. Evan brought her a mug of coffee, his hand brushing hers. You did what needed to be done, he said quietly. You gave her a truth no one else would. Clara nodded, though her heart ached. She'll say I ruined her life, she murmured. Evan looked at her, steady. No, he said. You stopped her from ruining yours. And for the first time in months, Clara felt the weight she'd carried. Years of guilt, obligation, and misplaced loyalty begin to lift. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Sienna's name became a shadow that people whispered about but didn't dare say aloud when Clara was near. The engagement was officially called off within a week. Damon, ever the opportunist, moved on swiftly, posting photos of himself on vacation with a new woman before the gossip even cooled. When Sienna finally showed up at Clara's doorstep, her eyes were swollen. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You humiliated me," she cried. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Clara stood in the doorway, her expression calm but tired. "I didn't humiliate you, Sienna. You did that yourself when you tried to deceive me." Sienna's lips trembled. "You're supposed to love me," she whispered. "I do," Clara said softly. "But love doesn't mean letting you hurt me." Sienna's tears turned to anger. "You've always thought you were better than me. Mom always took your side." Clara shook her head. "Mom didn't take sides. She just saw who showed up when it mattered." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Sienna turned and walked away, slamming her car door so hard the sound echoed down the quiet street. Months rolled by, and slowly, the chaos settled into memory. Clara found solace in tending to her mother's garden, the one place where everything still felt honest. She replanted the lavender bushes, repainted the porch, and replaced the old mailbox her mother had loved. Sometimes she'd sit outside in the evenings, sipping tea while listening to the wind rustle through the leaves. "You'd have loved this piece, Mom," she'd whisper into the quiet air. Evan would join her after work, and together they built something gentle and steady out of the ruins of betrayal. One morning, Clara received a small letter in the mail, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was Sienna's. Inside, there was no apology, no explanation. Just a single line: "I hope one day you forgive me for choosing money over you." Clara read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it inside her mother's old recipe book, the one that had survived every move, every storm. She didn't cry, but she felt something shift, a quiet closure she hadn't known she needed. The world eventually stopped talking about the scandal. People moved on, as they always do, finding new gossip to feed on. But for Clara, the lesson remained like a scar, visible only to her, yet deeply felt. She began volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others who'd been manipulated or taken advantage of by people they loved. "You can't pour from an empty cup," she'd tell them, her voice calm and warm. "Sometimes protecting yourself means disappointing others, and that's okay." One evening after a group session, a young woman approached her, tearful. "I wish I had your courage," she said. Clara smiled gently. "It's not courage," she replied. "It's survival." That night, Clara sat on her porch again, the stars bright above her, and realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't living for anyone else's approval. The house no longer felt like a burden or a battleground. It felt like home. One Saturday morning, Clara found herself sorting through old photo albums in the attic. Dust floated through the shafts of sunlight as she flipped through pages of birthdays, Christmases, and summers by the lake. There was a photo of her and Sienna as children, Clara holding her little sister on her shoulders, both laughing wildly, ice cream dripping down their hands. She smiled, bittersweet. "We had good moments," she murmured. She knew forgiveness would come, but not in the way Sienna expected. It wouldn't mean reconciliation, it would mean release. Clara decided then to frame that photo and hang it in the hallway, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that love, even when broken, once existed. She stood back, studying it under the soft morning light, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Spring came early that year, and the garden bloomed brighter than ever. Neighbors began stopping by, complimenting her flowers, sometimes bringing homemade pies or small gifts. "You've brought this place back to life," one elderly woman said. Clara smiled. "It's the house," she replied. "It just needed someone to stop fighting over it." The irony wasn't lost on her. This home that had once nearly torn her family apart had now become a haven, a symbol of what she'd reclaimed: her dignity, her independence, her peace. Evan watched her from the porch steps, a proud smile tugging at his lips. "You've changed," he said softly one night as they watched the stars. Clara turned to him, amused. good or bad?" He shook his head. "Stronger," he said simply, "and somehow softer too." She leaned against him, grateful that through all the chaos, she'd learned what love truly meant, something real, unselfish, and steady. Years later, when people mentioned Sienna, it was with uncertainty. Some said she'd moved to another city, others that she'd tried to rebuild her reputation with charity work. Clara never asked. She had no bitterness left to spend. Once, while visiting the farmer's market downtown, she thought she saw Sienna across the crowd, hair shorter, shoulders hunched, but before she could be sure, the woman disappeared. And maybe that was how it was meant to be. Some chapters aren't meant to reopen. That night, Clara sat by the window, watching the rain trickle down the glass, and whispered, "I hope you found peace too, Sienna." She meant it. Clara eventually turned her mother's sewing room into a cozy office, where sunlight streamed across stacks of books and notebooks filled with her writing. She started documenting stories of boundaries, of healing, of ordinary people reclaiming themselves from manipulation. Her words reached others. Her message resonated. "Just because someone is family," she'd write, "doesn't mean they're entitled to your sacrifice." Emails began arriving from readers around the world, thanking her for giving them the courage to say no, to walk away, to choose themselves. It was then Clara realized that her pain had been repurposed into something powerful. She had become, in her quiet way, an advocate for truth and self-worth. And that was a legacy her mother would have been proud of. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the garden fence, Clara lit a single candle on the porch and whispered a thank you to the lessons, to the losses, and to the love that had survived despite everything. The wind carried the scent of lavender, mingling with the fading warmth of dusk. She smiled faintly, remembering her mother's words. "Peace isn't found, Clara. It's chosen." And she had chosen it again and again. Somewhere out there, Sienna was living her own version of that truth. But here, in the home built from both pain and love, Clara finally felt whole. As time went on, Clara began to realize that peace didn't mean silence. It meant understanding where to place her energy. She started spending weekends volunteering at the community library, organizing storytelling workshops for young girls. Her goal was simple: to teach them that their worth wasn't tied to pleasing anyone, not even family. One Saturday, a teenager named Lena stayed after class, lingering as everyone else left. "Miss Clara," she said quietly, "my mom keeps saying I owe her everything because she raised me, but she never lets me make choices for myself." Clara looked at her, recognizing the old ache in the girl's voice. "Love isn't a debt, sweetheart," she said softly. "It's a gift. When someone turns it into a transaction, they stop loving. You don't have to stop living." The girl nodded, wiping her eyes. Later that night, as Clara walked home beneath the golden streetlights, she thought about all the times she had mistaken guilt for love. That night, she lit a candle for every version of herself that had once said yes when she wanted to say no. Spring turned to autumn, and the air began to carry the faint chill of renewal. One afternoon, while clearing out her mother's old wardrobe, Clara found an envelope tucked behind a drawer. It was yellowed with time, sealed and addressed in her mother's handwriting. "For my daughters when I'm gone." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, short, but written with the tenderness of someone who had known both her children deeply. "My girls," it began, "I know life has made you different. Clara, your strength is your gift. Sienna, your charm is yours. I only pray you both learn that love without respect is hollow. This house belongs to the one who understands that truth first." Clara folded the letter slowly, her eyes stinging. "She knew," she whispered. She realized then that her mother hadn't just left her a house. She'd left her a test of character, and as painful as it had been, Clara had passed it. That evening, Clara walked through the garden as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and violet. She stopped by the lavender bushes, brushing her fingertips across the petals. The wind carried the familiar scent that always reminded her of her mother's presence. Evan joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're quiet tonight," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "I found Mom's letter. It felt like she was still guiding me." Evan nodded, looking around at the peaceful home they'd rebuilt together. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "You turned pain into purpose." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, the fading sunlight wrapping around them like a blessing. "You know what's strange?" she murmured. "For years, I was terrified of losing people. But now I understand. Sometimes letting go is how you keep yourself." Evan kissed the top of her head. "And sometimes," he said, "it's how you make room for the right people to stay." Years later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Clara stood at the same porch where everything had once fallen apart. The world around her had changed, new neighbors, new laughter, but the house still carried its heartbeat. She placed a vase of fresh lavender on the railing, the scent drifting upward like a promise kept. Inside, her framed childhood photo with Sienna still hung in the hallway untouched. She no longer felt anger when she saw it, just a soft ache that had learned to coexist with peace. Clara smiled as a group of children ran past her gate, their laughter echoing through the street. "Life goes on," she whispered. The wind stirred the trees, as if in agreement. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel like the caretaker, the protector, or the giver. She felt like herself, whole, unburdened, and finally free. And as the morning light spilled across her mother's old garden, it seemed to whisper back, "You chose peace, Clara." And that was enough. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.